Hello everyone, I'm Xiaogan. Okay, now let's write this warehouse component. You've already written the backpack component before. Actually, the warehouse component and the backpack component are largely similar with minor differences. But its special point is that it may need to interact with the warehouse component. So there will probably be a few more methods like this. So first, let's include the header file here. This is our minimal dependency. This is the asset we defined. And then we need to. We can actually refer to this to write it. There's no problem with that. We need to include our combo base, and at the same time, we need to include this. Okay, then, because on our end, our refa is implemented using memory, so we can include this memory game effects header file, and then on our end, we do this. Okay, no problem. Now let's define our equipment. How do we, within our equipment flag, define such an equipment? First, we have a pointer pointing to this equipment. And then on our end, we have a handle for the time effect. This handle is what we use after applying the wing. Once we equip the item, we use this handle to essentially modify this property. If you want to revert this property, you need this handle. So here we have a handle. Okay, then in the constructor, we need to perform a simple initialization on it. Then, when we check if it is available, we only check whether the asset pointer pointing to this equipment entity exists. If it exists, we consider it available. Then, so if we need to reset, we first invalidate this handle. If we had previously applied this wing, we need to release the memory. Then we won't release it inside the slot. We'll release it later when we call the logic externally, then set our asset pointer to null. Okay, so this defines a description of a slot within an equipment component. Then let's compile it. Don't worry about this. At this point, it actually detected it, probably because we already had this file. We had already added it, but now compiling definitely won't have this issue. Let's wait for him a moment. It should be okay. Then on our end, we'll start writing this down. So first of all, we definitely need to write a delegate. This delegate will help us notify the UA when our equipment changes. So it's the same approach as here. You can see it's the same. Then we need this component, right? And we'll copy this component over. Note that after this parenthesis, there must be a semicolon. This is equivalent to the constructor of our equipment component. Of course, the parent class it inherits. It inherits from combo base. Okay. Let's call the parent class here then we just need to paste this over. These are all the same. We mainly need this one. Let's paste this over. Go to our equipment component here. Good. After pasting it over, let's change the name. We are using this equip item. Then our equip items. Okay, it already has this method. So we need to copy this method over as well. As for this method, we wrote it here. So let's write it in the same position. Put it here. Then we need a delegate here. As for this delegate, let's put it here. Okay. With this speed set up, now we will implement all these methods. In this implementation, we just need to register this thing first. register this variable that needs to be monitored. Then here we need to include the header file. We put it on top. Then here I will put the header file because they will all be used later. Then we go back here. Okay, now it won't report errors anymore. And this is when the storage is synchronized over. We need to refresh this thing. We just need the final delegate. Okay, the name of this delegate should be this. It should be like this. This delegate. Okay. Let's go back to the previous part. Now we need to start writing this method one by one. First, there is this begin play method. Usually, we might not write anything in begin play, but we should still write this method out. To leave room for expansion, then we directly disable tick here, because we don't really need tick. Now that we have tick, we can also improve this method, but normally we would also write something like end play here. For example, clearing delegates or something. All of that is fine. Okay. Next, let's remember to write the code below. Okay, next, let's write this. Our CRUD operations. First, we prepare a method that allows us to notify the client from the server to refresh our UI. Because this method might be needed sometimes, although we are doing this through property replication, but sometimes you might need to manually refresh it. So we also need to implement this method. Okay, then this is for the server to call the client to execute. So here you just need to call this equipment delegate, then pass in this variable. Then this part is executed on the client side, so it's fine. Okay, now let's write our CRUD operations. Actually, these CRUD operations, for CRUD operations, it's best to execute them on the server. So first, let's write the create operation. For the create operation, we just need to find an empty slot and add it in. The reason we didn't mark it as RPC here is because for a function like create, it definitely should only be executed on the server. And when we operate, adding might fail. For example, if your slot is full, this situation, then we first need to get our own. This ASC, this must exist. Then we only operate on the server, this data. Then we directly use our cable forever. It should have has authority. Such a function. If we have authority, then we start to determine. So first you pass in, this thing must be usable. If it's not usable, then you definitely can't add empty one. So let's look for it. Just check if there's an empty slot, since this involves the container. Wheat, batter, in tri-seat. That way, we won't have to change it later. And let's keep this sync enabled by default. Okay. Actually, here you can, this container actually has a TLVV64 type. As I recall, that container cannot be resized. You declare it as a fixed size, and that's it. So here you can optimize this TLV, because if we only use 6, it might expand to, if there are 10 or 12, then the later capacity might be wasted. So you can consider at this point, if optimization is needed, then here, we first iterate through all these positions. We check if there is any empty position. So here we must look for empty content. Because we don't have equipment slots, there is no quantity thing. We determine whether it is currently unavailable. If it is not available, it means it is empty. That is, it is not available. It is usable. This part is a bit confusing. Actually, it's about finding an empty slot. If the original slot already has equipment, then it definitely won't work. Then we directly take this if it originally had no equipment. We assign this new equipment to this person. At this point, we need to apply the effect of this game effect onto our character. So first of all, what we need to do is create a handle for our game effect, a handle, then get our UEC component and apply it. So first, through this function, that is, through our getting our ASC, create an instance of game effect, then get its handle. After it is created, we need to this thing apply it onto it. This is the place. Let's apply this thing onto it. Then at the same time, we need to save this giant. We need to save it. After saving it, we can cancel it later. Then here we return a true. Okay, then if we haven't written this property synchronization, actually we haven't written the code for this property synchronization. We need to manually update it like this, but we have property synchronization. We modify it using these methods. This is equivalent to modifying this container. It should automatically pass this thing through the RPC method to propagate it down. Yeah, okay. Good, so if no empty slot is found, it means we have failed. We give a false. To be able to do some higher level logic, next we will write this and equip this item. That is, we need to unequip the item from which slot. So for this unequip action, we will give it a. We won't write RPC here. We will put all our pieces on our character. So I will remove the RPC here. And this unequip action here includes in equipping the wing and the removing the equipment, etc. Then we might also need to write some methods below. So we will write this method later. Okay, let's find its implementation. First, we must operate on the server. First, we need to get our equipment instance. Okay. So here we first get our inventory component. This inventory component must be available because you remove the equipment. If you remove this equipment and you don't add it to the backpack, then it will be lost. It will be deleted. That is not correct. Then we check, we store this money, the current equipment slot, whether it is available. If the current equipment slot is available, it means it can be removed. Then we obtain the relevant information of the equipment we want to remove. Then we try to add it to our warehouse component. We prepare a warehouse item. Then at this point, we directly add it here, but this must definitely be called on the server. We haven't written the electricity like this. Everyone knows it must be called on the server. So for this aspect, to avoid missing anything, we'll still add this S2 ticket. Okay, then if in the inventory component we can successfully add it, it proves we have already added it. We just need to remove our original one. Good, so we'll directly call our removal method here. Because we no longer need to manually notify the UI interface, since we wrote property replication. So here, we can just remove it directly. Okay, as for this removal, we will write this method later. Similarly, this method should also only be allowed to be called on the server. So first, we need to get our ASC. Get our EASC, and at the same time, get the equipment we want to remove. It must definitely exist for you to be able to remove it. And this equipment to be removed must be usable. Right. Then here we directly use our ASC to remove the spot. So it's remove activity. Remove this activated game effect, because we have a big pie here, and then it removes it. After removing it, we just need to release our, and then we go up with a true. This removal operation, we have completed it. So this is from equipment to this backpack. That's the removal. Then you might ask, where is the activation? For activation, we will write it into this warehouse main component, because we usually click from this warehouse subcomponent. Depending on the nature of this equipment, we will activate different effects accordingly. As for these next few transmissions, we will write them out for everyone. We should write authority here. Actually, these things all need to be operated on the authority. Otherwise, problems will occur. Okay? Then we will write 3 more methods here. As for these 3 methods, we will remove all the RPCs from them. We will remove all the RPC. We will transfer all the RPCs to this character. So this is the implementation method for swapping item within the equipment slot. So obviously, this means when we equip our equipment or something like that, we need to do it here. Essentially perform a swap. And this is from the equipment slot to the backpack. Let's take a look at how these methods are written. So here, for the internal swap within the equipment slot, we can just write it directly here. And the more troublesome part is essentially this involves the equipment slot interacting with the backpack, which is a bit more troublesome. Okay, we'll write these two in the next lesson.